Most adventurers think bread, meat, and booze are the only things that matter. But just filling your stomach is a waste of time. A meal is supposed to be delicious. It is the one thing that keeps you human. Good food is the finest spice for a life lived on the edge. The story begins inside the tavern. Another drunk warrior was busy reliving his glory days. Our MC Yoichi had heard these same stories 1,000 times before. For these guys, surviving another day in hell was worth every loud word. They lectured the young manager about survival, because dead men do not get to brag. But the tavern mood soared instantly when another patron called the veteran a loud old fart. The warrior took the insult personally and threatened to pull out his slingshot to teach the brat a lesson. Yoichi tried to intervene, begging them to take the fight outside before they trashed the place. Things got physical fast, and Yoichi was caught in the middle of the sudden chaos. Our boy hit the ground hard, clutching his arm as the crowd watched in shock. A mysterious woman stepped in, reminding the rowdy adventurers that Yoichi was as fragile as a porcelain doll. She used her magic to mend the damage, though she made sure to demand a free dinner for her help. The warriors finally got the message. If they wanted good food, they had to keep their manager in one piece. Yoichi isn't weak. The adventurers in this tavern are just on a completely different level. He makes one thing clear. Start another fight and they are banned for life. With the chaos settled, it was finally closing time for the rowdy crowd. This tavern wasn't always his. It originally belonged to a man he called his father. Yoichi was an outsider, suddenly dropped into this world with nothing but his memories. The old man was a legendary warrior but a terrible cook, so Yoichi took over the kitchen. When the old master passed away, he left the entire business to his foster son. Running the tavern on his own is a lot harder than he expected. Food culture in this world is absolute trash. He decides to prep a little extra to keep his standards high. Finding decent ingredients is a nightmare. Even basic things like oil and honey are priced like luxury items. But he does not let that stop him from getting creative. He wants to make sure everyone who eats here leaves satisfied. People often ask why he puts in so much effort for a bunch of rowdy warriors. Honestly, he wonders about it too. But the answer is simple. He just enjoys the process of making something good. This whole city was built for one purpose. It is positioned right around the mouth of a massive labyrinth. It is a town filled with free-spirited people who spend their lives living on the edge of death. As he starts his chores, two nervous kids approach the door. They want to know if this tavern buys loot found deep within the maze. Yoichi almost turned the kids away, but their rookie energy made him change his mind. The boy pulled out their prize, revealing a single worthless stone walnut. These weren't actually food. They were basically rocks that adventurers used as cheap ammo. Even if you managed to crack them open, the insides were way too bitter to actually eat. The kids were desperate, pouring out their entire collection just to trade for some bread. Yoichi couldn't break their hearts, so he lied and claimed he was actually looking for snacks. Seeing their relief made the lie worth it as he headed back to get their payment. He gave them 2 loaves and some change, letting them leave believing their hard work had paid off. Yoichi did not just give them food. He pointed them toward a cheap inn and a decent blacksmith so they would not get scammed on day one. The kids were hyped, celebrating their 3 copper coins and fresh bread like they had just won the lottery. Looking at them, he wondered if even the rowdiest drunks in his tavern used to be that wholesome back when they started. But there was no time for nostalgia. He had chores to do and a new batch of salted bread to worry about. Life was finally settling into a rhythm until a familiar voice called out, breaking the quiet of his daily routine. A veteran warrior came stomping back in, dragging the rookies by their collars like they were caught doing something suspicious. The poor kids were shaking, and the big man was not making it any better by asking Yoichi how he should handle them. Yoichi told him to chill out and drop them, knowing exactly how terrifying this town could be for total beginners. Yoichi apologized for the veterans' behavior, explaining that most of the regulars were just as rowdy. The kids spoke up, reminding him they were the ones who had sold him those stone walnuts. The boy introduced himself as Yukano and his companion as Sufi, both rookies in the adventuring world. They became visibly nervous, stating they had something important they needed to talk to him about. They apologized profusely, having recently learned that those stone walnuts were actually completely inedible. They wanted to return the money, but had already spent it all on their gear and lodging. Yukano desperately promised to pay him back tenfold if he just gave them a little more time. Blown away by their honesty, Yoichi invited them to stay for a free meal instead. Yoichi didn't just give them snacks. He served up a full feast of meat, bread, and rich soup. The rookies stared at the food like they were looking at a literal miracle, their eyes wide with wonder. They were stunned by how soft the bread was, compared to the rock-hard black wheat loaves from back home. Every single bite was a total game-changer, from the savory soup to the perfectly cooked meat. The kids didn't waste a second, devouring everything on their plates with pure joy. Watching them enjoy a real meal warmed Yoishi's heart, though he quickly realized they had no idea what a menu was. Literacy turned out to be a major hurdle, with one of them barely even able to recognize the alphabet. Yoichi just smiled and encouraged them to keep coming back, telling them to learn as they ate. But despite the warm meal, the two rookies felt like total failures. They wondered if they had jumped into this life way too early. Yoichi wouldn't let them dwell on it. He offered them more meat and reminded them that every pro starts out as a rookie. The weight of their mistakes was too heavy, though. They quietly admitted they were planning to give up and head back home tomorrow. Later that night, Yoichi stared at the stone walnuts. He felt guilty for buying them and crushing the kids' spirits. He could see that Yugadora was completely broken. He hated being the reason a young dream was cut short. If he could find a way to make these things edible, he could add something new to the menu and maybe give those kids a reason to stay. He wasn't going in blind. He had actually studied stone walnuts before and knew exactly why people called them uneatable. The reason hit him like a truck the second he tasted it. A tiny pouch on the seed made the whole thing ridiculously bitter. The bitter pouch was a moving target. Its position was different in every nut, making it impossible to predict. Yoichi knew he had to change his approach. Trying to force them open the same way clearly wasn't going to work. He attempted to use a candle to see through the shell, but the material was way too thick for any light to penetrate. If he didn't figure this out soon, those two rookies were going to pack their bags and head home for good. That's when he noticed a glass of water on the table. A completely new strategy started to form in his mind. He realized that bitter pocket was lighter than the rest of the seed. If he used water, it would act as a natural float. The plan was a massive success. By watching how the nut balanced in the water, he could finally pinpoint the target. But his victory was short-lived. Even knowing the location, the act of cracking the shell still risked a total disaster. He ditched the brute force and our boy gets an idea. If he had a syringe, this could work. And surprisingly, syringes are pretty common in this world since doctors use them for potion injections. He held the nut steady in the water and lined up a needle with the shell's seam. He took a deep breath and pushed the syringe in. This was his last chance to get it right. It worked perfectly. The bitter pouch was gone, leaving nothing but pure flavor behind. One bite confirmed he had a winner. The nut meat was moist and sweet, a total game changer compared to the bitter mess everyone knew. With the secret unlocked, he was ready to move to the final stage of his plan. He began roasting the processed nuts, making them aromatic and durable enough to survive any adventure. This was the ultimate survival ration. Lightweight, delicious, and exactly what every adventurer needed in their pack. Early the next morning, the rookies were packed and ready to quit for good. Just as they turned to leave, they heard their names called out. Yoichi came sprinting towards them, shouting that he'd made a massive discovery just as they were about to walk away. He dropped the ultimate bombshell. Thanks to their help, he'd finally figured out how to make those stone walnuts edible. Before they could even process the news, he started geeking out over his water float strategy and how he removed the bitter pouch. Then, he showed them the results. A batch of perfectly roasted nut meat that looked nothing like the rocks they'd found. The rookies were skeptical. Everyone in the world knew these things were basically stones, but the smell alone was starting to change their minds. They each took a piece and hesitated for a second before finally taking a bite. The reaction was instant. The flavor was incredibly sweet and fragrant, a total 180 from the bitter mess everyone expected. They couldn't believe it. This wasn't just a snack. It was going to be the most popular dish the Tavern had ever seen. Honestly, Yoichi had nearly given up. He thought he'd already seen the limits of this world's ingredients. But turns out our boy was just narrow-minded because he actually discovers the secret recipe for Coca-Cola in another world. This win proved that the labyrinth was actually a massive treasure trove of flavors just waiting to be found. He didn't take all the credit for himself, though. He made sure to thank the rookies, telling them that this discovery was all thanks to their help. Before they could head out, he handed them a bag of the processed nuts. He knew they would need some solid fuel for their next run. The rookies were caught off guard by his gesture. They thanked him one last time, finally ready to face the dungeon again with a bit more confidence. Yugadora was completely fired up. He called out to Sefi, ready to dive back into the labyrinth and see what else was out there. Sefi gave a small smile and nodded. They weren't just quitting anymore, and they finally had a reason to keep pushing forward. Watching them go, Yoichi couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He joked that he felt like a proud dad at a graduation ceremony, leaving the kids totally confused. Yoichi was being realistic. He wasn't a hero, just a tavern cook. Saving the world was out of the question. He couldn't use magic or even swing a sword. But if his food gave others the strength to keep going, he had already won. The road ahead was long, but as long as they didn't quit, their story would keep moving forward. The tavern was absolute chaos. Customers were shouting from every corner, demanding more servings of the new specialty as fast as Yoichi could make them. Yoichi was completely swamped. He tried his best to keep up with the overwhelming demand, telling the hungry crowd to just wait a bit while he worked the kitchen solo. Even the regulars were getting demanding. One customer complained about the small portion size, but Yoichi didn't budge. He sold them by weight, not by count, so if they wanted more, they had to order more. Ever since the stone walnuts hit the menu, business had been booming like never before. It was a massive success, but being a one-man show was finally starting to take a toll on him. Just as things were settling down, a creepy presence appeared right behind him. A voice whispered for the manager, giving Yoichi a massive jump scare. It was a local chef who had heard the rumors about the tavern. He was desperate to know the secret behind how Yoichi managed to turn bitter stone walnuts into such a gourmet snack. The man was practically begging. He claimed his own restaurant was on the verge of closing and pleaded with Yoichi to share his processing method to help save his business. But the conversation was cut short by a sudden bang at the door. A crowd of merchants burst inside, waving bags of gold and demanding to buy the famous walnuts in bulk. The kitchen turned into a war zone. Customers were screaming for more walnuts while a local chef tried to bribe Yoichi for his secrets. He was reaching his limit. Running a one-man show at this pace was practically a death sentence. Yoichi realized that selling his secrets might actually be a win-win. It would bring in some serious gold and finally keep the local creeps from stalking his kitchen. He was already planning to buy a pressure cooker to speed up the work, but his solo brainstorming session was interrupted by an unexpected voice at the door. Little did he know, his cooking had already caught the attention of a mysterious girl watching from the shadows. It was Yugadora and Sufi, the rookie adventurers who were becoming his most reliable suppliers. They had brought a fresh haul of 100 nuts, even offering to let him double-check the bag to be safe. Even though they were starving, they told Yoichi he could pay them later since the tavern was so crowded. After dealing with greedy merchants and desperate chefs, their pure kindness was enough to move him to tears. He told them to forget about the business and just eat. Tonight, the specialty was completely on the house. Yugadora dug into the fresh walnut bread. This was the fuel he needed to hunt for even more exotic ingredients. Since the local soil was basically useless for farming, the labyrinth was their only hope for real flavor. Yoichi wasn't just a cook anymore. He was a pioneer obsessed with discovering tastes that nobody had ever experienced before. The goal was set. They were going to be the first ones to track down and taste the legendary bonefish. They hit the riverbank with high hopes. Yugadora was sure they would be swimming in fish by sunset. He split up to cover more ground. It was just a few slimes, so there was zero reason to be stressed. Sifi definitely didn't agree. Every sound in the forest felt like a threat. She was not a fan of slimes at all. A blur of movement cut through the silence. Sifi moved like a reflex, shielding her friend from a sudden ambush. Sifi was convinced she saw a dragon's tail, but high-level monsters weren't supposed to be on this floor. She started to doubt herself until Yugadora suddenly spotted their real target swimming nearby. This was their chance. They scrambled to get the nets ready before the legendary fish could escape. Later that evening, the bell chimed as the duo finally made it back to the tavern. Yoichi gave them a warm welcome, but they looked strangely refreshed and glowing. It turned out they got caught in a massive downpour and hit the public baths on the way home. The water was so perfect that they lost track of time, soaking until their skin was practically steaming. Finally, they revealed the prize. They hadn't just caught one bonefish, they brought back a massive haul. The bonefish was a literal nightmare. This tough white fish was practically all bone, making it better for arrowheads than a dinner plate. Yoichi was hyped to try new recipes. He told the rookies they were officially full-fledged adventurers now, making them both blush with pride. Now it was time to get to work and see if this legendary catch was even edible. Up close, it looked just like a standard mackerel, but the texture was way too rough, and it felt like it would be impossible to chew. He started by scaling it, but the moment he tried to fillet the body, his knife hit a literal wall. It wouldn't even make a dent. The name wasn't a joke, it was purely solid bone, leaving him with nothing but a pile of tattered, useless scraps. Since the meat was a total bust, he hoped he could at least boil the bones down to make a rich ramen broth. That was a fail too. Boiling it in plain water produced zero flavor, and the little meat he found just got even tougher. Yoichi was about to throw in the towel until he spotted a shimmer on the surface of the water. It was fat. The fish wasn't just a pile of dry bones. It had hidden oils, which meant there was a secret level of flavor just waiting to be unlocked. He was fully locked in now. He ordered the rookies to bring back another massive haul so he could test every theory he had. That chef's intuition was screaming. This wasn't a dead end, it was a challenge he was born to solve. For the next several days, Yoichi went full mad scientist, trying everything from salt curing to grinding the fish into a fine powder. But the bonefish was built different. No matter what he tried, the results were always the same. Total crushing failure. After burning through his entire stock, he was left with nothing but a messy kitchen and a bruised ego. Out of dozens of attempts, only one thing was actually edible, a simple, rock-hard snack he dubbed the bone cracker. Yoichi was officially losing it. This was not the legendary labyrinth cuisine he dreamed of. Making a rock-hard cracker felt like a total failure. Just as he was about to give up, a voice called out from the entrance. Someone was there with a delivery. It was a local worker lugging a heavy, specialized iron pot. This was the secret weapon Yoichi had been waiting for. It was a high-grade pressure cooker. He hoped this would be the key to finally breaking down those impossible fish bones. The delivery guy was from a seaside town and knew his seafood. He even brought a message from his boss, asking Yoichi to come by for a drink. Yoichi paid for the equipment and thanked him. His mind was already back in the kitchen. He had a reputation to save. He was terrified that rumors were already spreading about his mediocre bone crackers. If he could not do better than that, his tavern was doomed. He immediately cranked the pressure to max, hoping to finally soften the fish. But even at 120 degrees it would not budge. All he got was a little bit of fat and a whole lot of disappointment. High heat was a bust, but Yoichi noticed something strange. The fish didn't release any oil when grilled, yet simmering it actually produced a bit of fat. It wasn't about more power, it was about the right temperature. He realized the fish only reacted to a very specific level of heat. He decided to start from scratch. No more fancy gear, just plain water and constant observation to find the breaking point. The results were immediate. At low and high temperatures, the fish stayed solid as a rock. But in the sweet spot between 50 and 70 degrees, the fat finally started to flow. He found the key. It wasn't a standard boil. This bonefish required a low-temperature slow cook to unlock its secrets. The broth was finally there. It was a bit bitter, but with the right seasoning, it would be incredible. Now, he had to see what happened to the meat. One bite changed everything. After days of chewing on literal rocks, the fish was finally tender enough to melt on his tongue. The bonefish might not be the most legendary ingredient in the world, but Yoichi had finally mastered it. He had turned a total failure into his next masterpiece. Yoichi brought the rookie duo in early for a private tasting. Sifi was loving the VIP vibes, but Yugadora was still a bit nervous about having the whole tavern to themselves before the official opening. Yugadora was so hyped he actually suggested cooking labyrinth dirt next. Sifi had to be the voice of reason, reminding him that even Yoichi had limits. But the rookie was already deep in thought. He was determined to find the next legendary ingredient, no matter how impossible it seemed. The duo explained that the bonefish was found in a spring within the labyrinth forest levels. It was a legendary ingredient from a place where most people only expect to find monsters. The rookies admitted that the bonefish was once so hard it almost shattered their teeth. Yoichi just smiled, knowing he had successfully turned a literal rock into his newest masterpiece. Yoichi was ready to restock. He offered the rookie duo a fat stack of gold to head back into the labyrinth and catch more bonefish, but they weren't interested in a payout. Yugadora turned down the fee, explaining that the cash didn't matter. For them, being part of this culinary breakthrough was the only reward they needed. Yoichi finally cracked the code. The bonefish was no longer a tooth-shattering rock, it was a culinary masterpiece. Seeing them this happy made all the failed experiments worth it. The bond was officially sealed. Yoichi kept his promise. Since they were the ones who brought him the impossible ingredient, it was only fair they got the first bite. Now, the moment of truth had finally arrived. He was about to unveil the world's very first salt-simmered grilled bonefish. Yoichi finally revealed his newest creation, the salt-simmered grilled bonefish. After days of struggle, the tooth-shattering rock had finally been turned into a gourmet masterpiece. Yugadora and Sefi couldn't believe their eyes. The legendary bonefish, once a tooth-shattering rock, finally looked like actual, tender food. Sifi didn't even wait for silverware. She grabbed a piece with her bare hands and took a bite, the savory flavor hitting her all at once. Yoichi watched them like a nervous chef on opening night. One look at their faces told him everything he needed to know. It was a total masterpiece. Yugadora started geeking out over the crispy skin and melting texture, but Yoichi just laughed and told him to stop talking and start eating. Seeing those happy faces made all the stress and failed experiments worth it. Yoichi had officially conquered his second labyrinth specialty. The bond was sealed. Yoichi was already counting on the rookie duo to bring back his third legendary ingredient, and they were more than ready. He even teased them about naming the new menu item after them, though they seemed a bit too shy for that level of tavern fame. But the smell of success travels fast. In the shadows outside, a mysterious girl with horns appeared, clearly looking for a taste of whatever was cooking. Yoichi stepped out to sweep the tavern entrance only to find a surprise waiting for him. The mysterious horned girl from earlier had collapsed right against his wall, looking completely drained. It was a strange twist of fate. As the saying goes, what goes around comes around. As soon as he brought her inside and served some food, she did not hesitate. She began tearing into the grilled bonefish with a level of hunger he had never seen before. Yoichi could only watch in stunned silence. He was used to hungry customers, but this girl was eating like it was her very last meal. He tried to calm her down, warning her not to rush or she might choke, but his words went ignored. The tavern was filled with the aggressive sounds of her crunching through the legendary fish. Looking at her, Yoichi could not help but think about his own past. Years ago, the old master had taken him in when he was lost. Now, by some twist of fate, he was the one taking in a mysterious girl. But he started noticing things that made him question if girl was even the right word. Between the horns on her head and her tattered tail, she was clearly something different. This was his first time seeing a demi-human in person. He knew the labyrinth was home to all sorts of creatures like goblins, so it was not that strange, but the wounds covering her body were a grim sight. When he finally asked for her name, she softly replied that it was Yukano. But when the conversation turned to her family, she went completely silent, leaving her past a mystery. Yoishi's mind raced with possibilities, wondering if she might be an orphan. Seeing the heavy silence that followed his question, he realized he shouldn't pry too much into her past, opting to respect her boundaries for now. Deciding to change the subject, he asked her a more direct question about her presence there. He wanted to understand why, out of all the buildings in the area, she had chosen to sit right in front of his shop. Yukano looked up at him, her feline-like eyes reflecting a simple, honest truth. She explained that she hadn't come for anything complicated. She was simply drawn there because the aroma of his cooking smelled so good. It clicks for Yoichi. The smell of his cooking is what led her to his doorstep. He just smiles, telling her to eat as much as she wants. He makes her an offer, suggesting that if she has nowhere else to go, she can live there. When she refuses, he tries again, asking her to at least stay until her wounds heal. But her answer is still the same. Yoichi makes the strange girl a simple offer. If she stays with him, she'll always have a full belly. For someone starving, it was a deal she couldn't refuse. She was staying. But there was no time for deep thoughts. Yukano, having devoured her meal, presented her empty plate and simply said, "More, please." After tending to her wounds, Yoichi tells the girl she's all cleaned up, offering her a place to stay until her bandages can come off. A clock rings and Yoichi realizes how late it is. He rushes off, telling Yukano he's got prep work to do and that she can use the bed. But his offer is met with dead silence. As Yoichi works, he reflects on his own past, wondering if the old master felt this way when he took him in. A voice asks who he's talking about, and Yoichi begins to tell his story. But just because he gave up on cooking the peaches didn't mean they were useless. Yukano proudly shows him a beanbag she made from a crap peach seed, catching him completely off guard with her intense stare. Sensing his mood, Yukano peeks over the counter, catching Yoichi by surprise as he asks what she's doing. He tells her he's prepping stone walnuts, even showing her the tool he uses to crack them open. But Yukano doesn't even know what prepping means. Yukano curiously watches him work, to which he explains that it's just cooking prep, a necessary step to make the food taste good. Yoichi explains his unique method. He uses a syringe to remove the bitter part inside, then puts it in a nutcracker. After cracking it open, he asks Yukano if she gets it. Yoichi complains that the prep work is brutal, feeling like the real battle begins before they even open the doors. Yukano proudly announces that she's finished her task. The patrons are loving it, with one gushing over how cute she is for helping out. Yoichi just looks on, watching the tavern's newest waitress settle into her role. Curious, Yukano asks what he's holding. Yoichi takes the opportunity to teach her a lesson, explaining that knives are dangerous so using one is bad. She repeats the word back to him, committing it to memory. But the lively tavern is about to get a shock, as a newcomer's shout cuts through the noise. A demi-human. But with new help came new problems. The customers were taken aback by Yukano, openly wondering about her horns and tail. Their suspicion quickly turned into affection, as they doted on her like family. Yoichi learned she had insisted on helping out at the shop. One of the regulars watched the scene unfold, thinking to himself, after the stone walnuts and the bonefish dish, a demi-human waitress was just another one of Yoishi's gimmicks. Yoichi just smiled, happy that someone finally asked. He proudly announced his next big idea, a labyrinth dish made with crap peaches. The customers were horrified. One of them knew exactly what those were, shouting that if you eat them, you get serious digestive issues. Crap peaches were infamous. Found in the labyrinth's upper levels, they smelled sweet but caused intense diarrhea. Even healing magic couldn't save them, as it destroyed all taste and aroma. But Yoichi was confident. He believed he could find a way to make them edible and planned to try a prototype that very night. As the night wore on, one of the regulars excitedly called for another drink, insisting the new girl bring it over so she could learn. Although someone else offered to get it, Yukano insisted she was okay and could help, lifting the heavy mug with determination. But the drunk customer got too curious, grabbing her horns and wondering if she was a deer-lizard hybrid, forcing Yoichi to yell at him to knock it off. Yoichi slammed a glass of water on the table, telling him no touching was allowed. The man just laughed, asking who drinks water in a tavern. The man whined that Yoichi was killing the vibe, but the cook was fed up, calling him a damn drunk under his breath. Before he could do anything else, Yukano settled it herself, smashing the guy with a massive tail whip that sent him flying. He was knocked out cold on the floor. The other customers could only stare in pure, unfiltered shock. Yukano calmly walked over to a stunned Yoichi, asking if he was all right. He just stammered that he was fine. The other customers could only stare, whispering amongst themselves. They wondered if all demi-humans were this powerful, with one admitting she was cute despite the raw display of strength. But instead of being praised, Yoichi gets a lecture from Yukano, who wags her finger and scolds him for letting dangerous things happen. Looking at the man-shaped crater in the wall, Yoichi has a terrifying realization. He might have just hired one hell of a girl. Later, with the previous night's chaos behind them, Yoichi pulls himself together. While Yukano sleeps, he gets ready to tackle his next big project, the infamous crab peaches. He's already written down a list of potential cooking methods, confident that one of them has to work. The fruit smells incredibly sweet and juicy, making him wish it could be eaten as is. After taking a small bite, he begins his culinary experiments, starting with low-temperature cooking. But a moment later, a violent noise erupts from the bathroom, waking Yukano from her sleep. It seems the crab peach lived up to its name. Yoichi stumbles out, completely drained, and apologizes as Yukano asks what's wrong. Barely able to stand, Yoichi tells her to put up the closed today sign for him. He's not giving up, crossing off failed methods from his list, determined to crack the crab peach problem. But his regulars are completely caught off guard. One after another, they show up to the locked door, confused why the tavern is suddenly closed. Days later, Yoichi looks like death itself. Yugadora and Sifi finally find him, asking if he's okay. They tell him everyone's been worried since he's been closed so often. He explains his obsession. The poison isn't in the skin or the seed, meaning the flesh could be made edible. He's so close he can taste it, even if his friends don't get it. Sometime later, the tavern is back in business. Yukano, now in a proper waitress uniform, takes an order for 2 bonefish while Yoichi gets to work in the kitchen. She watches over the patrons, a silent and steady presence as the life of the tavern returns to normal. Looking at him, Sefi tells him that she understands his pride as a chef. But she warns him that knowing when to back off takes courage too. Even adventurers will die if they don't retreat when they should. Yoichi flips the script, pointing out that they only became real adventurers because they refused to give up. But Yugadora backs Sefi up, recalling a close call against a mid-level monster where Sefi ran out of magic, and their only choice was to run for their lives. He explains that even running away wasn't pointless. It's all part of the cycle of growth that allows them to come back stronger. Yugadora looks him dead in the eye, reminding Yoichi that he has something important to protect right now and needs to take care of his body. His words hit home. As Yoishi's gaze falls on Yukano hard at work, he quietly agrees. Later that night, under the full moon, Yoichi finally admits to himself that they were right. The next day, Yukano finds him asking if he's prepping the crab peaches again. But Yoichi just smiles, finally telling her that he's given up. He's quitting the crab peaches for good. But just because he gave up on cooking them, didn't mean they were useless. Yukano proudly shows him a beanbag she made from a crab peach seed. He can't help but laugh at her resourcefulness, before noticing her tail is healing well and offering to take the bandage off. The thought sends Yukano into a panic, worried that once she's healed, she'll have no reason to stay with him. Yoichi is surprised she was worried about that, reassuring her that he already considers her their exclusive waitress. He then asks her directly if she wants to live with him, and with a heartfelt look, she agrees. And just like that, the tavern returned to its lively self, with adventurers calling for another round of adventurers' brew. But when a patron asks what the brew is, he reveals a shocking secret. It's made from the very same rotten peaches Yoichi gave up on. He explains that while the flesh of the rotten peach was uneatable, he salvaged the skin and seeds, soaking them in booze to create a mixed liquor he calls adventurer's brew. The adventurer yells back, asking why he didn't just call it peach liquor. Yoichi sheepishly replies that the word peach doesn't exactly have the best image anymore. Their argument is cut short when Yukano appears, asking if they're fighting. The adventurers immediately get nervous, insisting they're all buddies there. As they break into song, Yoichi wistfully mentions all the recipes he wanted to try, like peach salad or compote, if only the flesh had been usable. Sensing his mood, Yukano peeks over the counter and gently asks if he needs any help. But Yoichi just looks at his creation with a smile, admitting that sometimes, it's important to accept defeat. Yukano is hard at work cleaning up the front of the tavern when some familiar faces arrive. It is Yugadora and Sifi, dropping by to see how the tavern's new exclusive waitress is settling in. They did not come empty-handed either. Yugadora is back with another delivery of crab peaches, and he is clearly impressed by how well Yukano is managing to keep the place spotless all on her own. However, Yoichi is not actually there to take the shipment. Yukano explains that he has stepped out for a bit, heading over to the local hardware store for some specialized supplies. Across town, Yoichi is meeting with a veteran blacksmith named Dog. He has been waiting on a specific custom order for a while, and it looks like it is finally ready for pickup. Dog presents his latest masterpiece, which is a specialized nutcracker. It is a heavy-duty piece of hardware designed to handle the toughest ingredients the labyrinth has to offer. The tool is incredible, capable of cracking 4 shells at once. Dog even modified the handle to be easier to use, ensuring that even someone with smaller hands like Yukano can handle it without any trouble. Business at the tavern has been booming lately, and Dog can tell Yoichi is making a killing with his unique labyrinth cuisine. Yoichi admits that things have been so busy they are starting to run short on hands. With things going so well, Yoichi realizes it might be time for a full renovation soon. But there is no time to just stand around dreaming. He still has a tavern to run and a girl waiting for him. Before leaving, Dog pulls out a secret stash of high-quality wine and begs Yoichi not to snitch to his wife. Grapes are a total luxury in this town, But Yoichi admits he had plenty of it back in his old world. Back when he was a rookie adventurer, Dog traveled everywhere and sampled the best drinks in the world. He even claims his height isn't natural. Apparently, a minotaur stomped him flat during a dungeon crawl. Looking at his reflection in the glass, Dog gets nostalgic for the days when he was young and fearless. That fear comes back fast when his wife suddenly appears, slamming the bottle on his head for the secret splurge. Yoichi can only watch awkwardly as the two argue about Dog blowing an entire month of wages on booze. The wife walks off to put him on a strict allowance, but not before apologizing to Yoichi for the mess. Dog gets a look in his eyes that screams desperation. He is dead serious about his next request. He begs Yoichi to make his next labyrinth dish wine. It has to be cheap and tasty, but Yoichi knows that producing alcohol from dungeon ingredients is easier said than done. Dog declares it a man-to-man promise, leaving Yoichi with a heavy new responsibility. Later, back at the tavern, Yugadora and Sifi wonder why Yoichi is even bothering with water grapes. Yukano watches from the counter as Yoichi thanks the pair for the quick delivery. They were already in the area, so the extra trip was no big deal. Yoichi squeezes a grape and takes a drink, but it is just as he suspected. It tastes almost exactly like plain water. Adventurers usually only use water grapes for hydration in the upper levels of the labyrinth. They are as big as a fist but have hardly any flavor. Yoichi considers boiling the grapes to concentrate the flavor, but there is a major catch. This fruit is a cursed poison that becomes even more toxic when it is heated. Sufi warns him that detoxifying it is almost impossible, making his usual cooking techniques completely useless. Heating the fruit was officially off the table. At just 40 degrees, the color shifted and the whole batch turned toxic. Yoichi realized he needed a different way to remove the moisture without destroying his precious ingredients. He decided to switch tactics to sun-drying. Yukano looked on as he set out a fresh basket of fruit on the tavern counter. The goal was simple. Use the power of the sun to naturally dehydrate the fruit into something high quality. Yoichi was already dreaming of a fortune. If he could turn these into dried grapes for wine, he would finally get rich. Yoichi offers Yukano a taste of the prototype. Yoichi takes a bite to check the quality while Yukano watches with pure hesitation. The flavor is so intense that a single sample leaves them desperate for a drink of water. The wait was finally over. Yoichi served the first glass of his prototype wine, eager for Dog to take the very first sip. Yoichi takes a moment to relax and thanks Yukano for the refreshment. However, Yukano is puzzled by a strange mystery. They've already run out of ice, and she's positive she didn't use enough to finish their entire supply so quickly. Yoichi was stunned to see that the water had vanished through evaporation, even in the freezing cold. He pointed out the thin layer of frost that had settled on the inside of the machine. The science was simple. Water can evaporate at any temperature, a fact that left Yukano completely confused. But for Yoichi, this was the ultimate breakthrough he had been searching for. He rushed out the door immediately, telling Yukano he might not be back tonight, and reminding her to brush her teeth. Elsewhere, Dog was still at his forge, focused on his work late into the night. The blacksmith nearly jumped when Yoichi suddenly burst into the workshop, shouting his name. Despite the late hour, Yoichi shoved a blueprint for a freeze-drying machine into his hands, demanding he build it immediately. He explains that freeze-drying is all about vacuum freezing technology. You freeze the food first, then suck out the moisture in a total vacuum. It works because the lower the pressure, the easier it is for water to evaporate. At ground level, water boils at 100 degrees, but on Mount Fuji's summit, it happens at just 87 because of the low pressure. This machine mimics that exact principle to dry things perfectly while keeping them frozen to preserve their quality. Dog examines the results and is genuinely impressed. He notes that since the fruit won't rot or grow mold, this new method is actually a massive deal. He admits he is surprised Yoichi even thought of something so clever. Yoichi just gives a humble smile, claiming the whole breakthrough was really just a fluke. Yoichi was already looking at the big picture. This tech meant they could finally produce high-quality wine for dirt cheap. Dog agreed, though he knew the gear would still need a few more tweaks before it was perfect. Dog finds the proposal interesting. He gives Yoichi his word, ready to make it happen. Inside the forge, the atmosphere was electric. Dog was officially fired up and ready to get to work. He gathered his crew around the blueprints for Yoishi's new kitchen gear and made his orders clear. They were going to pull an all-nighter and finish the entire job by tomorrow morning. The wine was the perfect bribe. Dog was officially on board, ready to forge any specialized tool Yoichi could dream up. The forge immediately roared to life as the team hauled in heavy iron plates to start on the custom kitchen gear. Yoichi gets the shock of his life when he is suddenly ambushed in the dark tavern. Yukano nearly takes Yoichi out with a broom, mistaking him for a common thief in the dark tavern. Yoichi apologizes immediately, revealing he was just trying to avoid waking her up. Yoichi shows her the new machine he brought back, hoping to finally concentrate the flavors of the water grapes. He explains that by using a water magic stone to power a vacuum pump, the fruit can be frozen and dehydrated perfectly. With the experiment finally underway, Yoichi tells her they just have to wait a few days and see if it works. They both stare at the racks of fruit, praying that the final product turns out to be tasty. The days turn into weeks, and soon 20 days have passed since they first loaded the machine. The blacksmith Dog is absolutely stunned when he finally sees the finished result of the water grape wine. Inside the forge, Yoichi admits that this is only the first prototype of his freeze-drying experiment, but the results are promising. He took the freeze-dried grapes to a brewery for fermentation. Now he wants Dog to be the first person to taste the vintage. The new creation is a water grape wine. It is perfectly paired with stone walnuts and freeze-dried grapes. Dog takes a sip and is immediately blown away by the rich, sweet flavor. He notes a subtle bitterness that follows. He claims it beats the most expensive wines on the market. It will only get better if they let it age. The freeze-dried grapes also make for an excellent snack on their own. Since the fruit is common in the dungeon, production will be incredibly cheap. Yoichi is full of ideas for new dishes. Having a master blacksmith like Dog on his side feels like having 100 helpers. Even Yoishi's mentor once said that with Dog's skills, there was never a need for any other blacksmith. Dog mutters that he's exactly like his father, then quickly warns Yoichi not to barge in at midnight again. Yoichi just laughs, promising he'll be more careful next time. Yoichi offers some stone walnuts and freeze-dried grapes while asking for his knives to be sharpened and some new kitchen gear to be made. Dog grumbles about the extra work, but the wine has put him in a great mood. After another long swig, Dog officially gives his word. He'll craft whatever Yoichi needs, no questions asked. They sit together in the quiet warmth of the forge, enjoying the rare piece. To Dog, this isn't just a prototype. It's the best wine he's ever had. In this world, the labyrinth has one strict rule. If a creature rots away the second it dies, it's officially a monster. Only the monsters with insane vitality leave anything behind. These rare remains are worth a fortune to magic item crafters. Then there are the gatekeepers. These floor bosses drop high-grade gear no matter how many times adventurers kill them. The veterans who walk around decked out in boss loot are the real deal. In this town, they are called mid-tier pros. Yoichi hoped some of those boss drops would be edible, but it turns out legendary monsters do not make for good snacks. Even without monster meat on the menu, the tavern was booming. It was finally time for a serious upgrade. Yoichi poured his profits back into the business, transforming the cramped tavern into a massive, multi-floor establishment. By buying out the neighboring warehouse and raising the ceiling, he effectively doubled his space. Now he just needs the customers. The massive gamble was finally paying off. Even the rookie adventurers were shocked by the sheer scale of the new and improved tavern. To fund the expansion, Yoichi sold his simplified recipes for labyrinth ingredients to the public, turning them into local sensations. But he wasn't running the place alone. Yukano remained the backbone of the kitchen, handling all the heavy prep work with ease. Yoichi had started spoiling her with gifts from the market, including a cute new pouch he claimed was just a random find. He even picked out a matching hairpin, insisting that he just happened to notice it while shopping for kitchen supplies. With an entirely new wardrobe of clothes and shoes, it was clear that Yoichi had fully embraced his role as a doting parent. Sifi couldn't resist the urge to tease him, laughing about how their rich boss was spending his profits on his favorite waitress. He tried to claim it was all strictly professional, but his flustered reaction proved that he cared far more than he was willing to admit. Sifi laughed, saying it was obvious they were like father and daughter. Yoichi immediately tried to change the subject by ordering Yukano to light the tavern sign. The two adventurers shared a look as they watched him struggle. It was clear to everyone that he was just embarrassed. Business was booming. The chatter of happy customers filled the massive new space as the night officially began. Yoichi took a brief moment to catch his breath. He wondered if Yukano saw him as a mentor or just some guy she lived with. But the kitchen was too busy for deep thoughts. Yukano quickly called out orders for soup and bonefish. He watched her navigate the tables with ease. She was far more than just a staff member to him. Once the rush ended, he prepared a late-night staff meal. He served a bowl of bonefish tanenden as a reward for her hard work. Yukano had never heard of the dish before. He explained that since the ingredients were unrelated, it was called a stranger bowl. Usually a dish with chicken and egg is called a parent and child bowl. Since these ingredients are unrelated, he calls it a stranger bowl. The name didn't matter to her as long as it was edible. She was ready to dig in immediately, but Yoichi stopped her for a second. He wanted to teach her a tradition from his homeland. Since every meal represents a life taken, you have to show gratitude before eating. Yukano didn't understand what a homeland was. He explained it as the place where your parents and your home are located. He instantly realized his mistake. Yukano was an orphan and talking about parents was a total lapse in judgment. She stared at the bowl as the words sank in. Then, without warning, her body went limp and she collapsed onto the floor. Yoichi screamed her name in a panic. She was completely unresponsive, and the late-night staff meal was forgotten. He brought in a doctor to examine her right away. The diagnosis was simple. Yukano was suffering from severe malnutrition. Yoichi was completely floored. He gave her 3 meals every day, but the doctor said she was starving. It wasn't a curse or a magic spell. Her body simply needed more nutrition than normal food could provide. The doctor headed home as night fell. Yoichi stayed by her bedside feeling more confused than ever. Yugadora and Sifi arrived later that evening. They were shocked to hear she still wasn't showing any improvement. Her health was actually declining. Despite her massive appetite, she was growing weaker with every passing hour. She had already eaten bonefish and peaches. Yoichi began to worry that he had simply worked her too hard. He tried to offer her more juice, but she finally spoke up. He jumped when she suddenly whispered his name. The regular menu wasn't going to cut it anymore. Yukano looked him in the eye and demanded monster meat. Yoichi was caught off guard. She didn't want regular livestock like pork or chicken. She wanted the meat of a literal monster. It turns out she had a history with the stuff. Before meeting him, she survived by eating whatever monsters she could find in the labyrinth. Her methods were purely animalistic. She didn't bother with fire or seasoning. She just hunted them down and ate them alive. Yoichi didn't care about the risks or the weirdness. If monster meat was the only thing that could save her life, he was going to find it. He made a promise to take that raw diet and turn it into a masterpiece. For now, he just wanted her to focus on resting. He immediately rushed out to find his adventurer friends. He needed them to head back into the dungeon and bring him a specimen to cook. They were shocked by the request because labyrinth cuisine was basically forbidden, but Yoichi was desperate to save his friend. However, there was a major logistical problem. In this world, the bodies of monsters usually dissolved into dust the moment they were killed. Yugadora had to remind him of the hard truth. They were talking about mist meat, an ingredient that shouldn't even exist. He knew the laws of this world by heart. Labyrinth monsters were never meant to be used as food. Normal creatures like bonefish were fine, but monsters spawned by the dungeon were a different story. They started rotting the moment they stopped breathing. This was why hunters called it mist meat. No matter how fast a butcher worked, the meat would vanish into thin air before it ever hit a plate. But Yoichi refused to give up. If he didn't find a way to make the impossible edible, Yukano would never recover. He came up with a desperate plan. They would capture a monster alive and bring it back so he could cook it the very second it was killed. As his friends agreed to the mission, Yukano stared out at the dark labyrinth. She knew exactly what kind of nightmare he was about to face. The plan was set, but the core problem remained. How was he supposed to cook something that turned into a ghost the moment it died? The hunt for a living specimen started immediately as Yugadora and Sifi tracked a horned rabbit through the brush. Capturing a monster alive was way harder than just killing it, and this thing was moving like a literal blur. Sifi tried to time her move perfectly, hoping to trap the beast before it could escape their reach. But the rabbit was too quick, turning the simple hunt into a chaotic game of tag that they were losing. Then disaster struck. In the heat of the moment, Yugadora swung his blade just a little too hard. The creature stopped breathing and the mist meat immediately started to vanish, leaving them with nothing but a failed mission. While his friends struggled in the woods, Yoichi stayed by the sickbed, counting every second he had left. He could feel her life slipping away, knowing that if the next hunt failed, he would lose her for good. The tavern was reaching its breaking point as the dinner rush began. Yoichi scrambled to serve any snacks he had left to keep the crowd happy. Every table was shouting for attention, but he was completely out of options. Without Yukano there to manage the floor, the atmosphere turned cold and aggressive. He tried to laugh it off, claiming she was just recovering from a minor fever. The regulars weren't convinced. 5 days of absence was unheard of for a simple cold. In reality, her condition was getting worse as her body rejected normal nutrients. He put everything on the line, trusting his friends to return with a miracle. Just as the tavern was reaching its breaking point, the front door bell finally chimed. Yoichi's anxiety turned into pure relief as he spotted his teammates making their way through the crowd. The rowdy regulars were still screaming for more drinks, but Yoichi only had eyes for the mission results. They had actually done it, bringing back a bag filled with 3 very alive and very angry monsters. These flying rabbits were low-level threats, but their insane speed made them a total nightmare to catch. Yoichi even had a scar on his face to prove just how dangerous these little beasts could be. But he wasn't about to let a little past trauma stop him from locking in and finishing the job. To keep the meat from vanishing, he was going to treat the monster like a fresh sea bream and butcher it while it was still alive. The secret was a technique called nerve stunning, a way to paralyze the body while keeping the heart beating. He had already mastered the skill on normal animals, but monsters were a completely different challenge. He finally made his move, driving the needle home to freeze the beast in its tracks. But it was a total failure. The monster died instantly and its body started vanishing into thin air. The anatomy of these creatures was a mystery, and he was quickly running out of time to solve it. Sifi noticed the walls were now covered in detailed sketches of internal organs and bone structures. Yoichi explained that these were his personal research notes, his only map to conquering the mist meat. She had come to help, but he still had zero clue how to actually start the cooking process. Yoichi asked where Yugadora was, only to find out the guy had passed out drunk after the hunt. But there was no time for small talk. Yoichi was finally starting to map out the monster's complex nervous system. Sifi watched him work, realizing that everyone in the tavern was counting on him to save Yukano's life. He tried to brush off the pressure, but seeing Sefi's rare moment of vulnerability made the situation feel all too real. The conversation shifted to Sifi's partner, who she insisted was nothing more than a childhood friend from her hometown. But the second Yoichi suggested they were actually flirting, she completely lost her cool. Drama aside, they both knew the mission came first. They made a silent vow to finish the job together. The clock was ticking. After 10 straight failures, Yoichi prepped his 11th subject for the final attempt. Success at last. The needle hit the sweet spot, freezing the rabbit while keeping its heart beating. But the clock was still ticking. He only had a 60-minute window before the meat turned into rotten sludge. Yoichi grabbed his knife, ready to work. He could not afford to hesitate for even a second. He broke down the creature into 4 distinct cuts, each requiring a specific culinary technique to master. The air filled with the scent of searing steaks and bubbling stews. He was turning a monster into a masterpiece. The stress of the mission finally faded. He was back in his element, doing what he loved most. He carried the fresh dish to Yukano's bedside, knocking softly before entering the quiet room. The rich smell hit her immediately. Her eyes widened as the missed meat finally reached its destination. Yukano looked at the spread of pies and steaks, realizing this was the impossible meal she had been waiting for. Yoichi confirmed it was a full monster meat platter, prepared specifically to get her back on her feet. He explained the trick, showing how butchering the beast while it was paralyzed stopped the rot before it could start. Her mouth began to water as she realized her friends had gone through hell just to bring these rabbits back alive. She offered a silent prayer of thanks, her heart full as she prepared for her first real meal in days. Yoichi just smiled, encouraging her to dig in before the masterpiece lost its heat. She did not hesitate, taking a massive bite that sent a wave of rich flavor through her entire body. One word said it all. It was delicious, and the long struggle to master the missed meat was officially over. Yoichi explained that the meat had a surprisingly complex flavor, blending fruity notes with a rich nuttiness. This was thanks to their diet of stone walnuts and wild peaches, which seasoned the meat from the inside out. At the end of the day, the chef only cared about one thing. If it tasted good, the mission was a success. Yukano was finally full for the first time in days, her body finally getting the nutrients it desperately needed. She felt bad about missing her shifts, apologizing for being away from the tavern for so long. But Yoichi told her to relax. The customers were already throwing fits because they missed seeing her. He joked that nobody even thanked him for the food anymore, proving she was the real heart of the business. He suddenly remembered the peach juice and scrambled out of the room to fetch it for her. But before he could leave, she stopped him. She had something serious to say. He immediately panicked, thinking she was still in pain from the starvation. He checked her temperature to be safe, but she insisted she was fine. She hesitated, searching for the right words to express how she felt. Then she finally said it. To her, he wasn't just a boss, he was a father. Scene cuts to a new adventurer, dead tired after all the kills. Yeah, this is enough for today. Back at the usual one of the regulars was showing off a new sword forged from a boss weapon. It was a high-level relic that could slice through metal like butter. But the only thing Yoichi cared about was whether the monster dropped any food. Clearing the gatekeeper was a huge win, finally opening the path to the mid-layers. The chef was already losing his mind thinking about all the new ingredients he could cook. However, Yugadora couldn't shake the feeling that the labyrinth was hiding a much bigger secret. Yugadora wondered if the city labyrinth was actually related to dragons. But his focus shifted to Yukano, who was acting bizarre while balancing a wooden mug on her head. Sefi pointed out how rare small parties were, mentioning one person who conquered the mid-layers solo. This legendary lone wolf was famous for swordplay so fast it was barely visible. Suddenly, a loud regular started yelling, accusing Yoichi of ignoring him for way too long. He did not want more all, but he felt the new menu was missing something vital. The man practically screamed his demand for the chef to start using fresh milk. Yoichi thought milk was too expensive, but he was already dreaming about making fresh cheese and butter. Yoichi brushed off the demand as just another random opinion. But Yugadora revealed that this drunkard was actually the legendary lone wolf magic swordsman, Akarunania. The chef did not buy the hype, insisting this person was nothing more than a local tavern regular. That is when Akarunania snapped, finally realizing Yoichi had mistaken her gender for months. Suddenly, every single embarrassing moment of them together flashed through the chef's mind. He tried to blame her short hair and rough behavior, but she was not having any of his excuses. The realization hit her hard, and she burst into tears while the group labeled Yoichi a total villain. Even Sifi was stunned to learn the truth, while Yugadora called out the chef for his epic failure. To make up for his massive mistake, Yoichi promised to finally get some milk for the tavern. But since buying real milk was way too expensive, he needed to find a labyrinth alternative. Akarunania suggested a rare ingredient called milky sap found in the labyrinth mid-layers. It was a common ingredient used by local apothecaries to create potent antidotes. The sap was known for its detoxifying properties, though the raw version tasted extremely bitter. Shops even sold the leftover liquid from the medicine process as a thin milk substitute. Yoichi wondered why anyone would drink it, but the nutritional benefits were exactly what he needed. Now the chef just had to figure out how to turn this bitter medicinal waste into actual milk. Yoichi immediately tasked the magic swordsman with securing a fresh sample of the sap. He knew her speed was the only way to get the ingredients before they spoiled. She took the job without hesitation, already planning her route through the town to gather supplies for the journey. Meanwhile, the chef headed to the local apothecary to understand the science behind this weird liquid. He traded Monster Nerve's stunning info for secrets on how the sap was processed. He discovered that mixing ash into raw sap caused a chemical reaction. The medicinal parts would sink to the bottom as solids, leaving a white liquid residue behind. Akarunania returned with the raw materials in record time. The apothecary warned them that while the residue lacked bitterness, it also lost its richness, making the flavor thin and watery. Back at the tavern kitchen, the chef finally poured out the legendary milky sap. It looked identical to real milk, but the thick texture was suspicious. Even the demi-human waitress was impressed by the visual similarity. If they could solve the taste problem, they would have a literal gold mine on their hands. One tiny taste confirmed his worst fears. The bitterness was aggressive and overwhelming, proving that turning medicinal waste into a delicacy was going to be a total nightmare. Yoichi followed the apothecary's advice and added ash to the mix. It was still bitter, but he could detect a rich milky flavor buried deep down. Next, he poured the mixture through a cloth to filter out the solids. The white medicinal clumps began to sink, separating from the liquid. The process worked perfectly. The medicinal waste was trapped on the fabric, leaving behind a clear residue in the bowl. But the flavor was thin and tasted like watered-down milk. Yukano suggested boiling it for hours to see if it would gain some richness. They watched the pot bubble as the liquid reduced. Yoichi was impressed that his waitress was actually starting to understand the logic of labyrinth cooking. Unfortunately, the concentrated version still wasn't right. It was definitely thicker, but it was far from being tasty. To make matters worse, the yield was pathetic. A whole pot of ingredients only produced a single spoonful, making it more expensive than real milk. Yoichi realized the umami was being lost during the filtering stage. Cooking with the residue was a complete dead end. Yoichi realized he needed a better alkaline source to save the umami, so he started brainstorming a shopping list. He told Yukano to hold down the fort and headed straight for the busy morning market. The place was a goldmine of weird items, including stone walnut bread and pillows that promised magical dreams. The streets were unusually crowded, showing just how fast the city was growing. Ever since he shared his secret cooking methods, labyrinth cuisine had turned the town into a booming tourist destination. Suddenly, a vendor offering herbal soap caught his eye, claiming it was soft enough for a child. Yoichi knew that soap was alkaline, so he bought a couple of bars to use for his next experiment. He also asked about buying some seawater, but the merchant explained that it was way too far and expensive to import. Since real seawater was off the table, he decided to roll the dice with basic brine instead. His plan was quickly sidetracked when he ran into Akarunania, who seemed way too shocked to see him. Akarunania was acting super suspicious, moving like she was hiding something top secret behind her back. She tried to make a run for it, but Yoichi promised that the new milk recipe was worth the wait. That was the magic word because she did a literal 180 and decided to tag along. She claimed she was just there to help carry the heavy stuff, since Yoichi clearly lacked any real muscle. Yoichi wasn't planning on buying a whole warehouse of goods, but she accepted the extra pair of hands anyway. Even so, being told she looked weak by a girl adventurer was a massive blow to his ego. The legendary Akarunania, whose heart skipped a beat the moment they start walking. Akarunania was literally on cloud 9. Ever since Yoichi asked her to tag along, she felt like she was finally making moves, but her heart was heavy with old memories. Her whole world flipped the moment her parents had another child. Her father already made it clear she knows how this goes. She nodded, yes, father. Standing in the busy market now, those old chains felt like a lifetime ago. Yoishi's eyes landed on a bag of seaweed powder, and decided to buy it. Akarunania wasn't really there anymore. She was too busy convincing herself this was a secret date. Yoichi was only thinking about chemistry though, searching for the perfect alkaline source to save his recipe. Akarunania immediately spotted some stone walnut bread and dragged him over to share a snack. She was fully convinced this was a romantic outing, even if he was just there for supplies. But Yoichi could only think about the recipe, complaining that the bread was way too crumbly. She had to physically pull him away before he actually tried to school the baker on fermentation times. To keep the mood alive, she pointed out a cute outfit that would look perfect on Yukano. The bait worked perfectly, and Yoichi finally relaxed as he imagined his waitress in the new clothes. Akarunania kept the distractions coming, leading him from one stall to the next to keep his mind off work. But the vibe shifted instantly when Yoichi picked out a piece of jewelry just for her. Yoichi held out a shimmering piece of jewelry, convinced it would look stunning on the legendary swordsman. The sudden gift sent her into a total tailspin, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. She tried to play it off as too girly, struggling to reconcile her tough image with something so delicate. Then, she dropped a bombshell, explaining that she was raised as a boy just to fulfill a family duty. Her life as the surrogate son ended the moment a real heir was born, leaving her discarded by her own flesh and blood. She didn't hold a grudge, though, because that rejection was exactly what led her to Yuishi's tavern. Just as the mood was getting heavy, a massive cart rattling nearby threatened to ruin their conversation. Gravity took over as a pile of crates came crashing down, but Acronania drew her blade in a flash. She moved faster than humanly possible, shattering the falling crates before they could even touch the ground. She didn't just stop the accident, she held the merchant at sword point for his absolute recklessness. Her voice was as sharp as her blade, warning him that his next mistake would be his last. Terrified for his life, the man could only beg for mercy before scurrying away from the scene. The market went silent as the crowd realized who they were looking at. The legendary magic swordswoman herself. Her reputation preceded her. Now the name Acronania was on every witness's lip. But the warrior's focus immediately shifted back to Yoichi, making sure her favorite chef was still in one piece. Even though Yoichi felt bad for the guy's lost cargo, he knew he'd be a pancake if it wasn't for her. Acronania didn't see herself as a hero. To her, always being the one saved felt more like a weakness. She reminded him that their roles were once very different. Years ago, he was the one who stood up to protect her. It happened when she was just a clumsy apprentice. She had dropped a plate, and the sound of it shattering felt like the end of her life. Back then, Yoishi's mentor was a man who didn't tolerate mistakes. She was terrified of the lecture that was about to come. But before the old man could react, Yoichi intervened. He grabbed the broken shards and claimed the accident was his fault. He took the blame and the lecture without a second thought. That small act of kindness stayed with her through every battle she ever fought. In the present, Yoichi had no memory of the event. To him it was just another busy day, but for her, it changed everything. She finally admitted the truth with a deep blush. He was the only person she trusted enough to show her vulnerable side. Acronania finally screamed her heart out right in the middle of the crowded street. She really liked our boy. But Yoichi was a total airhead and thought she was just a huge fan of his tavern. Man, what a gooner he is. Instead of a romantic moment, he took it as a sign to work even harder on his recipes. She could only watch in silence as he walked away, completely missing the point of her confession. Back at the tavern, it was time to get back to work on the latest labyrinth mystery. Yoichi wanted to use alkaline materials to strip the bitterness from some rare milky sap. His first genius idea was to mix an actual soap, and Yukano was surprisingly hyped about it. Unsurprisingly, the experiment was a total bust that tasted like a mouth full of laundry detergent. Yoichi moved on to salt water as a substitute for seawater, but the mixture refused to separate. Next, he brought out a bottle of ammonia from an alchemist, which let off a stench that was basically a biohazard. The smell was so toxic they had to scrap the idea immediately before Yukano passed out. This left him with only one more alkaline source to try: a small bag of seaweed. As they mixed the ingredients together, the clear sap finally transformed into a thick, milky white liquid. They both took a cautious sip and were immediately transported to a world of pure dairy bliss. It was rich and creamy, tasting exactly like high-quality milk from back home. With his new secret ingredient in hand, Yoichi was ready to cook the ultimate milk dish for his tavern. The first step was turning that liquid gold into actual butter. All he needed was a jar and a pinch of salt. Then came the hard part. A never-ending cycle of freezing and shaking that pushed his endurance to the limit. After straining it through a cloth, he finally had a solid lump of butter to show for his hard work. Next, he boiled the milk to sterilize it, prepping the base for some high-quality fresh cream. His arms were burning, making him wish he had asked the local blacksmith for an automatic whisk. But the struggle was worth it when he combined the ingredients with flour to make a velvety white sauce. Yukano worriedly checked on him as he slumped over, realizing how much effort went into a single batch. He promised her he only needed one last push to finish, refusing to stop until the masterpiece was complete. Yoichi knew he couldn't slack off, not when his most loyal customer was already waiting right outside his door. Acronania tried to act like she was just passing by, but her early arrival definitely gave her away. Yukano didn't buy the act for a second and hurried her inside to get a taste of the new menu. Yoichi was already in the zone, ready to serve up the masterpiece he had been slaving over all day. He laid out the spread, a full milk course made entirely from a plant that used to be a total mystery. The sight alone was enough to make her jaw drop. This didn't look like labyrinth junk anymore, it looked like high-end cuisine. Despite his arm being ready to fall off from all that whisking, Yoichi insisted she take the first bite of the stew. As the rich, creamy flavor hit her tongue, she knew that every second of his struggle was worth it. Between the crispy toast and the sweet hot milk, she was in pure food heaven. Yoichi teased that he only worked this hard because she was his favorite regular. The comment sent her into a panic, worried that she had revealed too much. She eventually gave in, admitting that this tavern was the only place she felt at home. Yukano prepared to flip the sign, but stopped when she saw the scene unfolding. A couple of regulars showed up early, asking if they could snag a table for two. She quickly shushed them, not wanting to ruin the emotional moment. The three of them ended up peeking through the crack to watch the drama. Yoichi froze as Akurunanya burst into tears, but he quickly realized these weren't tears of sadness. Far from this moment, far from the chaos, someone else was living a very different life. Before Seifi was a hardened adventurer, her life was actually pretty simple. She spent her days working in apple orchards, far away from the madness of the labyrinth. But even the most peaceful memories have a way of slipping through your fingers. The past was nothing more than a fading dream, and it was time to face the present. She snapped awake in the tavern, the morning sun already creeping into her room. Downstairs, the morning peace was already being shattered by the usual chaos. Yugadora was in peak form, exaggerating their latest near-death encounter for the crowd. While he was busy acting like a hero, Yoichi only had one question: was that monster actually edible? Seifi wasn't interested in the menu or the monsters. She just stared into her cup, completely checked out. Yugadora tried to snap her out of it by bringing up their recent scorpion fight, but she didn't hear a word he said. Even with the tavern buzzing and the food smelling great, she couldn't shake the gloom hanging over her. Yoichi and Yugadora pulled back to discuss the situation. Something was clearly draining her energy. Yoichi wondered if it was a classic case of love sickness, but Yugadora shot that theory down immediately. Then, the truth finally hit them. It wasn't about a boy. It was about where she came from. Years ago, back in her village, her older brother had started a family of his own just before she left. A recent letter from her sister-in-law had triggered everything, leaving her feeling like a stranger in a strange land. Yoichi suggested taking Seifi back to her hometown for a visit, but Yugadora knew it was not that simple. She insisted she was a grown adult and did not need help replying to the letter from her family. Yugadora could tell she was just acting tough, even if he did not share her strong connection to home. Yukano kept the drinks moving, hoping another round of all would help lift the heavy mood. The little waitress noticed Seifi looked pale and offered more milk, worried she might be feeling sick. It was not a physical illness, just a sudden wave of nostalgia that left her feeling empty. Seifi turned the question on Yukano, asking if she ever missed the taste of her own father's cooking. Yukano excitedly brought up a specific egg and chicken dish, proving that memories are best shared over food. Seifi realized that nostalgia was a bittersweet trap. It made her heart ache for a flavor that no longer existed in her current reality. Yoichi watched her carefully. He knew this wasn't a problem a regular tavern meal could solve. He understood the pain perfectly. Back when he first arrived, he would have done anything for a simple bowl of rice and miso soup. But unlike him, Seifi's hometown was still reachable. She didn't have to live on memories alone. Later that day, Yoichi grabbed a quill and started planning. He was determined to bring a piece of home to her. Yugadora gave him the rundown. Their village survived on simple staples like bread, potatoes, and pickled vegetables. That sounded like every tavern in the kingdom. To really hit home, he needed something more specific. Yugadora's face lit up as he remembered a specific local fruit. That was the missing piece of the puzzle. Fruit was usually a luxury for commoners, but Seifi's family ran their own orchard. She likely grew up eating it every single day. Yoichi needed a name. He grabbed a quill to take notes as Yugadora tried to recall the specific variety. After digging through a specialty encyclopedia, he found it. The fruit looked exactly like a peer from his own world. There was one massive problem. The harvest season was half a year away, and Seifi's mood was already hitting rock bottom. Yoichi couldn't wait months. He headed to his usual supplier, but the man had never even heard of that specific hometown specialty. Most local fruits were either too sour or lacked the right texture. But then, the merchant remembered something similar. He asked Yoichi if he had ever heard of a rare delicacy called moon fruit. It was a labyrinth ingredient famous for being incredibly sweet. If Yoichi could get his hands on it, he might just save Seifi. Labyrinth ingredients are never easy to find. Obtaining this specific fruit is going to be a total grind. The merchant drops some important lore. This fruit is rock hard and completely uneatable when it is freshly picked. Timing is everything. If you do not eat it before the next full moon, the fruit rots and turns into a tree. Luck is not exactly Yoishi's strong suit, but he pays the fee and places the order anyway. On the way back, he runs into Akurunania. He asks the legendary swordswoman to handle the heavy lifting for him. She manages to find a specimen that is absolutely glowing. Too bad it is still as hard as a brick. This rare delicacy only grows in the deep levels of the labyrinth. Its entire life cycle is tied to the moon. Yoichi takes a bite and immediately regrets his life choices. It is so bad that even Yukano passes on it. The raw fruit was a total disaster, so Yoichi tried chilling the pieces to see if the sweetness would finally come out. When that failed, he threw it in a pan, hoping a little heat would do the trick. It ended up as a crunchy salad, which was decent, but it wasn't the specific taste of home Seifi was craving. Yoichi realized he needed more information about this mysterious ingredient before he wasted any more time. As they headed back out to find the merchant, Yukano spotted a familiar pair across the street. It was Yugadora and Seifi looking through the display window of a local toy shop. Yugadora was doing his best to cheer her up with a stuffed animal, but her mood wasn't budging. Yoshi doubted a stuffed toy was the right choice for someone Seffi's age, but he promised to buy one for Yukano anyway. Yoshi watched the window in disbelief. The toy was a weird gorilla, and it definitely was not the right vibe for Seffi. But then a thought crossed his mind. Gorillas meant bananas, and that triggered a useful memory from his old life. Back home, bananas were always picked while they were green and completely uneatable. They only became sweet because they were stored with specific plants that released ripening hormones during transport. Apples were the secret weapon. They emitted a gas that forced any nearby fruit to mature in record time. If he could replicate that process here, he would not have to wait months for the moon fruit to soften up. This world had a similar ingredient called sunfruit. It looked just like an apple and likely shared the same properties. While Yugadora wasted money on a weird plushie, Yoshi hurried off to find a supplier before the shops closed. Sunfruit is basically the local version of a sour vinegar apple. Yoshi packed them into a wooden crate with the moon fruit to trigger the ripening process. A few days later, he called Yukano over to see if the big brain move actually worked. The aroma was already a 10 out of 10, so they sliced a piece off for a test. It was a total success. The fruit was crisp, sweet, and perfectly ripe in record time. Yoshi wanted to chill the slices, but Yukano told him to keep them at room temperature. He realized she was right. This wasn't about the best taste, but the taste of home. Seffi grew up without refrigerators or ice magic, so that warm flavor was exactly what she missed. Seffi's past was actually pretty cozy. No dangerous labyrinths, just a warm kitchen and her mother telling her to shut out the night chill. The village was dead quiet, but inside, Seffi was facing a choice that would change her life forever. Her brother had already settled down with a wife and kid, living a perfectly normal life that felt worlds away from adventure. This was the exact warmth Yoshi was trying to recreate, a time when life was simple, predictable, and safe. Suddenly, a knock at the door breaks the peaceful silence. Seffi gets up thinking it's just another neighbor stopping by. But it was Yugadora. He stood there in the dark, looking more intense than she had ever seen him. He didn't come for a midnight chat. He was there to get a final answer on the plan they had whispered about for months. Seeing him in full adventurer gear made it sink in. They weren't just kids playing pretend anymore, they were actually leaving. Seffi's memory drifted back to that night, the moment her simple village life came to an abrupt end. Yugadora had made it clear that she was the only one he wanted by his side. She chose to trade the warmth of her home for a life of uncertainty on the road. Back in the present, the weight of that choice was still keeping her in a total daze. Yoshi finally broke the silence, eager to reveal the results of his latest culinary experiment. The moonfruit was finally ready, looking sweet and juicy instead of its usual sour self. It was a perfect recreation of her childhood, and for a second, the tavern felt like home. Yoshi didn't just ripen a fruit. He built a bridge back to a world she thought she'd lost. As she took a bite, the floodgates finally opened. The flavor was a direct line to her past, back to the kitchen table she shared with her family. But that memory was bittersweet, reminding her of the night she left home without saying a real goodbye. Hearing her story, Yugadora realized they had very different lives. He grew up with nothing, so this luxury was brand new to him. Seffi didn't want him to feel left out, promising that one day they would visit her home and enjoy a meal together. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, deciding it was finally time to write back to the family she left behind. The mood lightened instantly. Yoshi was always the one fixing things, even when he wasn't trying to. It turned out he had seen more than they realized, catching them during their little shopping trip in the city. Yugadora tried to play it off as a random purchase, but Seffi saw right through him, thanking him for the thoughtful gift. Back at the tavern, the group toasted to their successful trip. However, Yugadora's choice in souvenirs was quickly becoming the joke of the night. Seffi's laughter was a sound the tavern rarely heard. For the first time, the memory of her past didn't feel like a burden. The weird little gorilla might have lacked classic charm, but it was exactly what she needed to move forward. The sun rises over the quiet border town, marking the start of another peaceful day. Yoshi starts his morning with a good stretch, feeling ready to face whatever comes his way. But the peace is short-lived when the smell of burning bread hits his nose. Breakfast is in danger. As they settle in to eat, Yukano mentions she has been picking up a new hobby lately. She has been taking drawing lessons from the shop owner who lives right next door. Yoshi decides it is time to return the favor. A little thank you gift would go a long way. It is all possible thanks to their new source of milky tree sap, which makes luxury dairy products affordable for everyone. With fresh butter and cheese finally on the table, the tavern's menu is expanding faster than ever. But there was still one missing piece to the puzzle. Yoshi realized the menu needed some fresh vegetables to really shine. He wasn't talking about the salty preserves they usually served. He wanted ingredients that were actually harvested from the earth. He was dreaming of something crisp and full of life, the kind of flavor that could elevate every single dish in the tavern. But this town had a major problem. The massive labyrinth underground made the local soil completely useless for farming. Most fresh produce had to be flown in from across the mountains. The cost of wyvern delivery made these simple items way too expensive. Ordinary people were stuck eating tough tubers and pickled roots. Yukano didn't even know what she was missing out on. Yoichi began sketching out his next big plan. He described a red and round vegetable that would change their menu forever. If he could get his hands on some tomatoes, he could finally make real pizza. He decided to submit a gathering request to the guild immediately. Yukano offered to help by drawing the vegetable based on Yoishi's memory. She produced a lifelike sketch that looked exactly like a real tomato. Yoichi was impressed, knowing this visual aid would make the guild request a breeze. He reasoned that if apples existed in this world, tomatoes had to be out there too. However, the guild receptionist looked at the request with total confusion. She had processed thousands of monster hunts, but never a request for vegetables. The commotion caught the eye of the guildmaster, who stepped out to investigate. He studied the drawing carefully, intrigued by such an unusual gathering request. As Yoichi waited for news on his tomato request, he watched the massive wyverns circling the town. These flying beasts were the only way to get fresh goods, making them the most important part of the local economy. He walked down to the landing site, where piles of crates from across the mountains were being unloaded. A friendly rider spotted him and asked if the chef was finally ready to start shipping his food to other cities. It turned out that the tavern reputation was growing fast, with labyrinth cuisine becoming a massive hit. The rider bragged about his bonus pay, while his dragon started sniffing the air with strange intensity. Suddenly, the rider had to fight for control as the beast reacted violently to something nearby. But it was not an attack. The powerful monster was actually cowering in total fear of someone in the group. Yoichi wondered if he was the one scaring the beast, but Yukano stepped forward with a gentle smile to calm it down. The massive monster immediately submitted to her touch, acting more like a loyal pet than a dangerous predator. The rider was completely stunned, as it usually takes years of intense training to get a wyvern this tame. Once the situation settled, Yoichi decided it was the perfect time to ask about his missing ingredient. He pulled out a lifelike sketch of a tomato, hoping a world traveler would recognize the mysterious vegetable. The rider recognized it immediately as a crimson melon, a rare luxury item that is usually sold in bottles. They apparently grow in dangerous dragon nests far to the north, making them nearly impossible for commoners to find. Yoichi begged for a fresh shipment, but the rider warned him that the produce would rot long before it reached the tavern. The rider explained that fetching a crimson melon was a massive logistical nightmare. The delivery pilot made it clear that a special trip would cost a literal fortune. Yoichi did not care about the money and begged them to take the job anyway. Once the deal was finally struck, the tavern crew began the long wait for their prize. Magic cooling wasn't enough to save the shipment. These rare crimson melons arrived as a total disaster, turning into a soggy, ruined mess before they even hit the kitchen. Yoichi took a bite, and while the texture was absolutely cursed, the flavor was the real deal. This wasn't just some random weed. It was a legit tomato, perfectly preserved despite looking like a dried-up raisin. The melon didn't just taste good, it felt alive. As a strange warmth flooded his body, Yoichi realized he was feeling the raw energy of a dragon's nest. He wondered if this internal heat was the same fuel that powered a dragon's breath fire. Dealing with fire-breathing wyverns just to run a tavern really hits different. Yoichi was finally realizing this world was on a whole other level of crazy. The guild finally delivered the vegetables, but they were just overpriced garbage that Yoichi couldn't even put on his menu. It was a harsh reminder that real quality was becoming a luxury in this world. Then things got even more awkward when Yukano casually called him dad for the first time. The guild finally delivered their batch of red ingredients, but it was straight-up garbage. Instead of actual tomatoes, they brought back a collection of useless junk like stone walnuts and random flowers. Every single item was a total bust, leaving the tavern with 0 usable ingredients for the menu. To make matters worse, Acarunania showed up with a lava bead that literally boils your blood if you eat it. Yoichi was hitting his limit because nothing was going right, and he felt like he was failing his mentor's legacy. That's when Yukano stepped in, asking if she could try growing the seeds from the ruined crimson melon. She didn't waste any time and started digging, convinced that some songs and stories would help them sprout. Yoichi tried to be the voice of reason, since the dirt around the tavern was practically a dead zone. But Yukano noticed the weeds were already thriving and wondered if her seeds could do the same. Since the crimson melons originally came from a dragon's nest, they might have the life force to survive anywhere. A few days later, Yukano was still at it, giving the soil a full concert to help the plants grow. The seeds actually sprouted, but the tiny plant looked completely drained of life. Yukano was devastated, worrying if she had accidentally drowned the poor thing with too much water. Yoichi suddenly had a lightbulb moment, realizing some high-quality fertilizer from a gardening shop might save it. He planned to take her the next day, but the little waitress was determined to fix her mistake immediately. She insisted on going alone, ready to take on her first real mission for the tavern. If they didn't hurry, the fragile crimson melon would definitely wither away into nothing. Yoichi was freaking out about sending her out solo, but he knew being overprotective would only hold her back. He finally relented, chalking it up as a necessary part of her education in this strange new world. Yoichi gave her directions to a gardening shop on the edge of town. He knew the owner well since she also handled the tavern cleaning. He went full dad mode, lecturing her about counting change and avoiding strangers. Yukano just wanted to get moving. She told him to stay put and prep the shop while she handled the mission. Being called dad caught him completely off guard. But there was zero chance he was letting her go alone. As Yukano started her first big errand, Yoichi was already tailing her from a distance. Yukano finally started her first big errand. Little did she know her overprotective dad was already stalking her from the shadows. Yoichi watched closely, noticing how small and nervous she looked without him there to guide her. Disaster struck when she accidentally slammed right into a massive adventurer. Thankfully, it was just a regular from the tavern who was impressed to see the kid out alone. He even teased that she was way tougher than her boss, which definitely wounded Yoichi's pride. Yoichi had to promise him a free drink just to make sure he didn't blow his cover. As she kept moving, even more locals stopped to cheer her on. With her unique horns and tail, she was basically a celebrity. Everyone wanted to make sure she reached her destination safely. Yukano was feeling herself. She was ready to crush the solo mission. She hummed through the streets, completely unaware of the eyes tracking her every move. But the stalker energy from her boss was reaching a final boss level. Yoichi was out here thanking everyone for treating her like a little celebrity. She finally made it to the gardening shop on the outskirts of town. The errand was a total success, and she even secured a free sunflower as a bonus. The owner told her to use it to make the tavern look a bit more lively. Seeing her succeed made all the stress and shadow stalking worth it. Yoichi finally felt he could stop hovering and head back to get the tavern ready. But on his way out, he spotted a group of local kids causing trouble nearby. They were arming themselves with mud balls and looking for an easy target. Yukano was right in the splash zone, completely distracted by her new sunflower. Yoichi watched in a panic as the kids launched a full-scale ambush from behind. Without even looking, Yukano used her massive tail to swat the mud right out of the air. The kids were left completely confused, thinking a random gust of wind just saved her. Seeing her walk away safely, Yoichi finally realized his little waitress never needed a bodyguard. That sunflower was the ultimate trophy of her first errand, but the stem was looking a little shaky. It looked like the poor girl was about to cry when she realized her prize was starting to snap. But she didn't stay down for long, quickly reaching for a nearby branch to use as a splint. Yoichi watched from behind some crates as she started tearing up her supplies to perform a field repair. She carefully tied the flower to the support, saving her precious gift with some quick thinking. The sight of her being such a good kid was enough to send her boss into a total sobbing fit. He was amazed she figured out the concept of grafting all on her own without anyone teaching her. It was a professional-level technique that proved his little waitress was a total natural with plants. Yoichi scrambled back to the tavern just in time to greet her. He was completely winded, but he had to act like he wasn't just stalking her from the shadows. He immediately got to work, testing his theory on the crimson melon plant. It was time to see if his botanical knowledge from his old world actually translated here. The scent was a total giveaway. This thing smelled exactly like the weeds found deep inside the labyrinth, meaning it was way tougher than it looked. He asked Yukano if he could borrow a small piece of her plant for an experiment. She didn't really get it, but she was happy to help her boss out. In his old world, gardeners used a technique called grafting. It was basically the plant equivalent of high-stakes transplant surgery. By fusing a delicate, tasty branch onto a rugged, disease-resistant root, you could essentially create a super plant. The strong base would feed the weak top. Yoichi carefully prepped the pots, hoping this gamble would pay off. He had never tried something this technical in a world where magic usually did all the heavy lifting. 20 days later, the results were undeniable. The experiment was a massive success, producing a harvest that looked better than anything he could have bought. The little plant actually did it. The first tiny fruits were finally starting to show. It survived against all odds. That labyrinth weed really was as tough as a monster. The harvest looked exactly like cherry tomatoes from back home, bright red and perfectly ripe. The flavor was a total explosion. It had that signature snap of fresh produce. This was the ultimate hybrid, a mini version of a rare fruit that was cheap and easy to grow. Now for the fun part. This new ingredient opened up a massive list of potential recipes. A simple caprese salad was the perfect way to highlight that fresh tangy sweetness. Or he could turn it into a rich meat sauce for pasta. Either way, his tavern was about to level up. Yoichi turned those hybrid melons into the ultimate take-home sandwiches for his hungry regulars. One customer was literally losing his mind over the new pasta, even if that red sauce looked a bit suspicious. It wasn't a crime scene, though. It was just the special melon sauce that was warming everyone right up. The regulars were loving the food, but they started worrying that Yoichi was overworking his new waitress. Yoichi immediately felt like a total villain, but Yukano wasn't even sweating it. She was actually hyped because she could finally handle big girl errands all by herself. The entire tavern started throwing a standing ovation as they watched her level up. If he was already crying like a baby now, the regulars joked he was definitely not ready for the dad life. The regulars weren't letting him off the hook, with one old-timer venting about the idiot his daughter once brought home. The old man snapped that a parent never stops worrying, before giving Yukano a stern warning about her future dating life. As the lectures continued late into the night, the hybrid plant sat on the windowsill as a silent reminder of his hard work. Yoichi kept his steel sharp as a tribute to the man who started it all. Lately, his sourcing was getting a lot easier thanks to the town's new obsession. The streets were literally transforming as gardening became the latest trend. Crimson melons were popping up on every windowsill and backyard in the district. Having locals grow the ingredients meant the kitchen was always stocked and ready. But success always attracts attention from people at the top of the food chain. The guildmaster finally showed up, and he wasn't there for a casual happy hour. The entire room went dead silent as everyone realized the vibe had just changed. Yoichi laid out the menu, hoping the sheer variety would keep the guildmaster from asking too many awkward questions. The boss was actually impressed by the custom artwork, not realizing the tavern's waitress was the secret artist. The vibe shifted immediately once he realized Yoishi's daughter was actually a horned demi-human. He tried to flex by ordering a luxury crab dish, but Yoichi had to shut that dream down fast. With no crab in sight, the guildmaster just told him to bring out the recommended course and some wine. The first course was a melon and bonefish combo that used a hidden layer of meat fat as a secret flavor weapon. Next up was a mushroom burger steak drenched in melon sauce, which paired perfectly with his glass of red. He finished the meal with some stone walnut bread, proving even the toughest boss couldn't resist Yoishi's cooking. The guildmaster was finally finished with his high-stakes meal. He gave a nod of approval, clearly satisfied with the unique menu. Yoichi noticed that his regulars had been suspiciously quiet during the entire visit. The boss decided to head out, not wanting to ruin the tavern vibe any longer. But before he stepped away, he shared a secret about his past. It turned out he had a deep respect for the man who taught Yoichi to cook. That old man was a legendary survivor who once turned down the guildmaster job. Yoichi was stunned to learn that his simple mentor was actually a world-class icon. The guildmaster was curious. He wanted to know why a chef with this much talent would settle for such a quiet spot. He asked if the goal was fame or money, but Yoichi quickly shot those ideas down. Then came the real surprise. The boss offered him a high-level position running the main guild cafeteria. It was a life-changing opportunity. The guildmaster told him to take his time and really think about the offer. Before leaving, he left one last instruction. If that luxury crab ever arrived, Yoichi had to let him know immediately. Yoichi stood there completely stunned. He had officially been scouted by the head of the guild. But all that talk of top-tier food just made him hungry for a taste of the real thing. He turned his attention back to his regular crew. It was time to see if they could help him source the next big catch. Forget the guild job. Yoichi was on a mission to find out if this labyrinth actually had any crab. His crew confirmed that the deep levels were full of fish and shells. It was a grind, but the loot was definitely there. Yugadora suggested a rock steel golem, but Safai wasn't having it. Eating a literal rock was where she drew the line. The conversation shifted as Yugadora tried to prove Sifi was basically a mind reader. He was sure they were perfectly in sync. She guessed he was thinking about the stone walnut bread, and she was almost right. His stomach always called the shots. Then he dropped a line that was way too smooth. He told her she looked cute while eating, completely changing the atmosphere. Sifi went into full panic mode while Yoichi just watched in silence. He had accidentally walked right into a romance drama. He used to think they were just close siblings, but the truth was obvious now. The tavern was officially a hotspot for flirting. Yoichi tried to stay out of the drama, but the attention was already shifting his way. Akrunania suddenly dropped a personal question that put him right in the hot seat. He didn't have a ready answer, mostly because his mind was usually buried in his next recipe. He finally settled on someone who truly appreciated a good meal, which described his ideal partner perfectly. But she was looking for something more specific, wondering if he had a preference for strong women. Yoichi was so focused on his sauce recipe that he completely missed the bait she was throwing out. The tavern was officially buzzing with romance, leaving the regular customers to watch the drama unfold. A few days later, Yugadora finally returned with a giant mud crab to replace the golem on the menu. Yoichi remembered that if these crabs thrashed around before dying, the meat would be completely ruined. He decided to boil the catch anyway just to see if any of the flavor remained. One bite was enough to tell him the meat was a watery and muddy disaster. It was a tall order for even an expert team like Yugadora's to kill these things without a struggle. These mud crabs were infamous for their stress response, which earned them the nickname of immortal crabs. Legend says only a cursed blade can strike fast enough to keep the flavor from turning foul. Since he was just a chef and not a master swordsman, Yoichi knew he needed a different approach. He planned to have the next batch delivered alive so he could figure out a way to kill them cleanly. Yoichi was thankful when Yugadora and Sifi finally delivered the mud crabs alive. He figured he could just take a few legs at a time instead of killing the whole thing. Yukano was more than ready to do the dirty work herself. But the second she tried to harvest a leg, the crab went into a total meltdown. The stress response ruined the meat, making it taste like watery garbage again. Yoishi's next big brain move was to knock them out with sleeping meds. That backfired immediately because the medicine turned the meat into a chemical nightmare. Purging the mud helped the smell, but even surgical nerve killing couldn't stop the stress from ruining the flavor. Yoichi was losing his mind, screaming at the ceiling because the mud crab situation was officially a disaster. That is when Yukano stepped up, promising she could butcher the beast in a literal heartbeat. Before he could process the claim, she snatched his mentor's precious blade and prepared to strike. In a total blur of motion, the crab was dismantled into perfect sections before it even had time to stress out. She was actually proud of herself, thinking she had finally cracked the code to preserving the flavor. However, the victory was short-lived when the priceless heirloom slipped right out of her hands. Yoichi immediately went for the save, his face going totally blank as he retrieved the tool. Yukano just stood there frozen, praying she had not just committed the ultimate sin in the kitchen. Yoichi stared at the blade, knowing it was the only thing he had left of his mentor. Instead of getting angry, he gave Yukano a gentle pat to settle her nerves. He warned her that knives were dangerous and she needed to be more careful. He showed her the photo of the old man, explaining that the blade was a precious heirloom. He promised the blacksmith could fix the damage, but Yukano was still drowning in guilt. He offered to teach her proper kitchen skills, but she was too scared to even touch the handle. Yoichi looked at the portrait and realized that parenting was way harder than running a tavern. But the bonding moment had to wait because the kitchen was still a mess. He finally accepted that instant kills were a pipe dream, but the real solution had been hiding in plain sight. It was time to pull out the legendary boiled frog method. The logic was simple. If you toss someone into fire, they run, but if you turn up the heat slowly, they stay chill until it is too late. He let the crabs relax in wet sand first, keeping their stress levels low before cranking the temperature 1 degree at a time. The result was a total culinary glow-up, turning the garbage mud meat into a high-end feast. Even the guildmaster couldn't handle the flavor, dropping a rare compliment after just one bite. He was convinced Yoichi had imported the meat from the capital, unable to believe this came from a local mud monster. Yoichi just laughed, explaining that no cursed swords were needed when you have a big-brain cooking strategy. The guildmaster was officially floored. He never thought someone could take a gross labyrinth monster and turn it into a 5-star masterpiece. He was vibing so hard he didn't even care about being polite, drinking the leftover juices straight from the empty shells. He officially crowned Yoichi a total pro for his unique ability to turn literal trash into high-tier delicacies. But the praise was just a setup for a much bigger question about an offer they had discussed in the past. Yoichi didn't even hesitate to give a hard pass. He had zero interest in leaving his kitchen for a fancy title at the guild. He wasn't chasing fame or status. His only goal was making sure the local community actually enjoyed their meals. In a world where eating was just about survival, he wanted to prove that food could be fun and delicious. But keeping that dream alive was tough, especially with a chaotic staff that kept chipping his precious kitchen tools. The guildmaster compared Dog to Yoishi's mentor, claiming the blacksmith was a pure craftsman. That was total cap because the guy was actually a retired adventurer who got folded by a minotaur. After clearing the plate, the guildmaster promised to return as long as the crab was on the menu. The tavern finally went quiet once the VIP guest officially made his exit. Yoichi was definitely feeling the burnout, accepting that every day in this world was a new circus. Just as he was about to crash for the night, Yukano peeked through the door with a serious look. She was finally locked in, ready to face her fears and learn how to handle a kitchen knife. It looked like his shift was nowhere near over, but he was ready to start the lesson. Yoichi started with the absolute basics, showing her exactly how to position her hands for the perfect cut. Yoichi finally secured the specialized mud crab scraper he needed to level up his kitchen game. Dog was flexing his craftsmanship, knowing this tool would make prep work a total breeze. But Yoishi's brain was already moving on to the next upgrade, high-tier alcohol for the tavern. He casually questioned the blacksmith's legit adventurer status, hitting a major nerve. Dog absolutely panicked, screaming at his workers just to hide how rattled he actually was. Back at the stove, Yoichi put the new scraper to work on some fresh labyrinth mud crabs. He layered crimson melon puree with phantom meat bacon to create a flavor profile that should not exist. The result was a total culinary glow-up that had the customers questioning reality. The crab meat cocktail salad was a total culinary flex, mixing complex flavors so perfectly it had the customers losing their minds. With the food giving off pure high-end restaurant energy, Yoichi caught a major blush from all the non-stop praise. Even though the vibes were immaculate, some of the regulars were starting to feel a bit salty about his sudden success. But the hype train was about to hit a massive roadblock when a very honest customer decided to keep it real. She dropped a total reality check, claiming that while the food was god tier, the beer was actually kind of mid. Even though the wine and sake were holding it down, the basic brew felt way too ordinary for such a high-level menu. Yoshi was completely stumped and didn't have a single comeback for her brutal honesty. He was just serving the standard world beer for now, but he realized the tavern needed a major liquid upgrade to match the food. The current beer was just basic fermented barley, making it a total mid-tier drink compared to the elite food. Yoshi had already checked every market, but the high-level grains he wanted were nowhere to be found in this world. He realized the missing link was the hops from his old world, which provided that iconic and refreshing bitterness. If he could track down a local substitute, he could finally give the tavern the liquid upgrade it deserved. Yukano was already on board, ready to dive back into the labyrinth for whatever the chef needed. The rookie was so locked in he could practically read Yoshi's mind before the chef even finished his sentence. Yoshi handed over a rough drawing of the plant, tasking the team with finding anything bitter that matched the shape. He felt a bit guilty for always dropping these weird fetch quests, but the grind for the perfect menu never stopped. Yukano wasn't just helping out of duty. He genuinely loved the search, telling the chef about how his obsession with treasure hunts started as a kid. While the tavern buzzed with orders for more pizza, the rookie started dropping some lore about his very first quest with Sifi. Back in their hometown, Sifi had supposedly found a legit treasure map, leading them on a hyped-up expedition into the woods. They spent the whole day digging under a tree marked with an X until they finally uncovered a stash of beautiful glass beads. Yoshi was totally confused, unable to understand how some basic glass beads counted as a legendary treasure. But Yukano had caught on to the secret early. Those were actually Sifi's favorite beads that she'd buried herself just to go on an adventure with him. Sifi was absolutely dying of embarrassment while he explained that the real treasure was just the vibes they shared. It was never about the actual loot. It was about the fact that they were a team from the very beginning. A few days later, the tavern was as busy as ever while Yoshi waited for any news on the search. The rookies finally returned with their first lead, but it looked suspiciously like a basic pine cone. Yoshi didn't hesitate to take a bite only to realize he never told them what color to look for. The effort was a total bust because the sample had absolutely zero flavor. Next, they presented him with a slab of bark from a tree that produced a cloudy white sap. Sifi promised the taste was bitter despite the weird shape, so Yoshi decided it was worth a shot. He immediately started boiling the bark to create a concentrated extract for the next batch of beer. But the experiment was a disaster because the brew ended up tasting like literal wood chips. Yoshi realized he couldn't do this alone. It was time to talk to a real professional. He tracked down Alker at the brewery, who was caught off guard by the chef's sudden interest in beer. The brewer was down to help though. Yoshi was a top-tier client and always brought in good business. The problem was that Yoshi didn't even have the basic ingredients for a proper batch yet. When he mentioned wanting a bitter flavor, Alker looked at him like he had two heads. In this world, the idea of making a drink bitter on purpose was just plain weird. This got Yoshi thinking. He didn't actually know the science behind why his old world used hops in the first place. He had to start from scratch and figure out how beer was even invented in this fantasy land. Alker broke it down simply. Beer wasn't a delicacy in this world, it was just an efficient way to process excess grain. Barley usually rotted after 5 months, but fermenting it into beer stretched that timer to 7. That's when it clicked for Yoshi. Back in his world, hops were the secret to making beer last even longer. He decided to shift his focus. Since he couldn't find hops, he would find another way to improve the drink's preservation. He turned to the most common preservatives in this world, attempting to brew with salt and vinegar. But the experiment was a complete failure. The batches were so foul that they were practically undrinkable. Just as he was hitting a wall, Yukano dragged a heavy wooden crate out from the depths of the warehouse. She tried a sip of old moon fruit juice, but natural fermentation had turned it into a fizzy and bitter surprise. Yoshi needed more than just a lucky accident. He needed a consistent way to replicate that bitter punch for his next batch of beer. His eyes landed on a stone walnut. It was a common item found in the labyrinth that most people simply ignored. He remembered the rookies telling him that the best treasures are usually the ones found right under your nose. The standard way to prep these was to use a syringe to suck out the bitter liquid, making the nut edible. But Yoshi started looking at the anatomy differently. If the hard shell already protected the nut, why did it need a bitter sac at all? The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. That bitterness wasn't a defense against animals, it was a natural antibacterial agent. Most nuts rot surprisingly fast, but this bitter fluid was the secret to keeping them fresh. He flashed back to a childhood experiment where he spent a week soaking tannins out of acorns, realizing he finally found his hops replacement. Earlier tests were a complete disaster. Every single batch was a moldy mess that he had to throw out. But the stone walnuts were different. They thrived in damp forests where everything else usually rotted away. This meant the bitter juice was actually a powerful natural preservative. He used a syringe to extract the fluid for testing. He only needed a tiny dose. Just 2 drops of the concentrate went into his next experimental batch. The flavor changed instantly. For the first time in this world, he was holding a drink that actually tasted like beer. The sharp bitterness didn't ruin the flavor. It actually highlighted the natural sweetness of the fermented grain. The recipe still needed some minor adjustments to get the balance perfect. But with the brewer's help, Yoichi finally had the secret to revolutionizing the local tavern scene. 20 days later, the wait was finally over. The shipment of bitter walnut extract had arrived, and Yukano was already dying to see it in action. Yoichi realized the liquid could do more than just add flavor. It could tenderize the toughest cuts of meat. If he could use magic stones to serve the brew ice cold, he'd have the ultimate refreshing combo. The cooking process began by searing the leanest parts of a cut of phantom meat. Once the aroma hit the air, he deglazed the pan with a heavy pour of his new bitter beer. The alcohol and carbonation reacted instantly, sending up a cloud of steam that stung his eyes. To finish it off, he tossed in some roughly chopped crimson melons to tie the whole dish together. The final result was a plate of beer stewed phantom meat paired with a frost-covered glass. It was finally time for the taste test to begin. The meat turned out incredibly tender with just a faint hint of the beer flavor. Then came the main attraction. 1 sip of the ice-cold brew was all the proof he needed. He had successfully recreated a drink that could change the entire tavern scene, even if the bitter taste was still a bit too mature for his young waitress. With the secret recipe perfected, it was time to welcome the first wave of customers. The tavern doors finally opened and Yoichi was ready to debut his masterpiece to the world. Adventurer took his seat but immediately noticed a heavy scent of spirits hanging in the air. He suspected the chef had started the party early, but Yoichi insisted it was strictly for quality control. A wandering bard's melody echoed through the city, drawing the attention of everyone in the plaza. Yoichi paused his morning chores as the lovely singing voice reached the tavern entrance. He complimented the tune, knowing that a professional musician was the secret to attracting a massive crowd. Since the bard was still searching for a venue, Yoichi saw the perfect opportunity to offer him a stage. They struck a deal on the spot, adding a legendary storyteller to the tavern's grand opening lineup. In this world, these traveling bards were the primary keepers of history, romance, and current events. Yoichi even relied on their melodic stories to help him learn the local language when he first arrived. With the entertainment booked and the beer cold, the tavern was finally ready to welcome its guests. Yukano was still in the middle of her morning routine, complaining to Yoichi about her toothbrush being totally worn out. The second she realized a customer was actually standing there, she panicked and slammed her door shut to go get dressed. The bard was left standing at the entrance, wondering what kind of monster he had just seen sprinting through the tavern. Yoichi didn't take the comment well at all, immediately defending her by claiming the girl was his daughter. The bard found the idea of a daughter with horns and a tail hilarious, but he was officially sold on the unique vibes of the bar. He took his place on the new stage and began to play, his melody instantly transforming the entire atmosphere of the room. The crowd was completely hooked by the performance, even if some were still more interested in getting their next round of beer. Even the most cynical regulars had to admit the singing was fire, though they hated seeing a scrawny guy get all the attention. The tip hat was already overflowing with coins as the crowd begged for an encore. The bard was officially the MVP, raking in a fortune while the tavern atmosphere reached a fever pitch. He had traveled the entire world, but this bar was quickly becoming his favorite stop. Yoichi was so impressed he offered the musician a free meal as a bonus for his performance. 1 bite was all it took for the bard's mind to be completely blown by the flavors. Word was spreading fast that the tavern's new chef was a literal miracle worker in the kitchen. The bard had heard the legends, but meeting Yoichi in person made him realize the rumors were true. Yoichi modestly explained that he simply had a knack for turning dangerous labyrinth monsters into 5-star delicacies. Seeing the chef's interest, the bard reached for a special souvenir he was carrying. He presented a transparent vegetable, a rare ingredient found deep within the town's labyrinth. The object was completely invisible, but its weight confirmed that it was actually there. Yoichi took hold of the empty air and was surprised to find it felt just like a heavy cabbage. To the bard's surprise, the chef immediately took a massive bite of the invisible plant. It had a physical texture, but the vegetable didn't have a single drop of flavor. The bard didn't care, convinced that the town's best chef could turn even this air into a meal. They struck a deal on the spot, trading a few days of music for a dish made from the ingredient. Yoichi refused to take the L. He immediately started paying local adventurers to gather as much intel as possible on the mysterious cabbage. The research was pretty weird. The cabbage would change colors in vinegar, but a bit of lye would turn it completely invisible again. Most people just used it for landscaping. It was a common decoration that nobody actually bothered to put on a dinner plate. These plants only grew in the pitch-black layers of the dungeon. They were a staple snack for the transparent monsters living down there. Yoichi got straight to work in the kitchen. He hoped that boiling the leaves in vinegar would finally make the texture edible. The boiled leaves basically felt like thick paper. Yoichi had a spark of genius and decided to shred them into a slaw to see if he could save the dish. It was a massive fail. No matter how much dressing he added, it still felt like he was chewing on a bowl of shredded paper. Even the core was giving him major problems. It was way too hard to cut, making it clear that this ingredient was a total nightmare. Yukano didn't care about the risks. Despite Yoishi's warning that the cabbage was too hard to chew, she grabbed a piece and got ready for a taste test. The kitchen filled with a series of brutal crunches. Yukano was actually destroying the ingredient, leaving Yoichi completely speechless at her raw power. It was a total fail. She spit it out, claiming it tasted like a rock, and Yoichi immediately panicked thinking she had shattered her teeth. He told her to open wide so he could check the damage. But instead of broken bits, he found a set of fangs that were built for total destruction. He realized then that he was dealing with a different breed of eater. Her teeth were sharp enough to handle anything he could throw at them. Yoichi started cracking up at the crazy situation, but Yukano wasn't having it. She got super embarrassed and yelled at him for staring so intensely. Meanwhile, the main floor was absolutely vibing. The bard was killing it on stage, and the customers were practically screaming for an encore. The tavern was officially the place to be. Even the regulars agreed the musician was a massive win, proving that Yoishi's eye for talent was just as good as his cooking. Sifi was caught in 4K fangirling over the bard, completely hooked by his elegant looks and smooth voice. Riding the momentum, the bard decided it was time to drop a story about the local legends sitting right in the house. Every adventurer in the room suddenly leaned in, hoping their latest dungeon runs were about to be immortalized in a hit song. He took center stage under the spotlight and ordered everyone to listen up, ready to spill some serious tea through his lyrics. But the second he mentioned a golden-haired swordsman and a beautiful mage childhood duo, the rookie pair literally spat out their drinks. The rest of the tavern immediately connected the dots, realizing the romantic ballad was exposing Sefi and Yugadora's private history. A bright red Yugadora begged Yoichi to pull the plug on the performance, but the chef just laughed at the absolute chaos. It was a night of peak vibes and laughter, but unfortunately, these peaceful days were already numbered. Even as the tavern enjoyed the music, Yoichi was lost in thought about how quickly things could change. He remembered his past failures, like the time he drank a spiritual elixir just to experiment with transparency. That experiment was a total disaster that felt like swallowing a live eel. He let out a heavy sigh, frustrated that he still hadn't found a single good idea to move his cooking forward. Akarunania noticed he was in his feelings and decided to snap him out of it. She leaned over the counter, asking why the chef looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yoichi tried to deflect by mentioning the bard was currently singing a romantic ballad about her. But Akarunania didn't give a single damn about the lyrics or the attention. Instead, she got uncomfortably close and asked him what his personal opinion of her was. Before he could even process the question, she challenged him to get on stage and sing. He immediately shot the idea down, arguing that a shopkeeper had no business performing while there was work to do. But she kept pushing, determined to see him step out of his comfort zone. Desperate to end the conversation, Yoichi faked a brutal coughing fit. He claimed his throat was suddenly in too much pain to hit a single note. His acting was so convincing that Yukano actually got worried and offered to bring him medicine. He had to quickly backpedal, realizing his lie was about to waste their limited medical supplies. Yukano claimed she knew about a legendary medicine hidden deep within the labyrinth layers. Yoichi was surprised that his waitress possessed such high-level knowledge about rare supplies. The secret involved using a blizzard wolf to freeze the sap of a withered purple tree. According to Yukano, this frozen sap provides an instant cooling effect that heals the throat perfectly. Akarunania immediately realized she was describing a high-ranking species of Trent. The veteran adventurers were completely blindsided by the news. They had seen these ingredients in the dungeon's lower depths for years, but never knew cold storage was the secret cheat code to unlocking their flavor. When Akarunania pressed for how a simple waitress knew such a niche detail, Yukano immediately folded and called out for her dad to bail her out. Just as the vibes reached an all-time high, a sudden voice killed the music. Sefi froze, staring at a new face in the crowd as the word dad slipped out. But Yoichi was already lost in thought, fascinated by the idea of ingredients changing through extreme cold. Yukano's medical knowledge triggered a massive epiphany in Yoishi's brain. He was finally onto something big. He remembered under snow cabbage, a technique where vegetables actually get sweeter to survive the frost. He felt like a total amateur for not connecting these culinary dots sooner. In the wild, winter is a brutal season that usually kills anything with roots. When the temperature drops, moisture expands and destroys a plant's delicate internal structure. This is exactly why frozen water pipes burst or why thawed food turns into mush. But some plants have evolved a genius countermeasure to stay alive in the sub-zero cold. They replace their normal fluids with a sugary antifreeze that keeps them from ever turning into ice. Maple syrup is the perfect example of this logic. It stays liquid even when the temperatures drop. Under snow, cabbage works on the same principle. By fighting the frost, it produces a natural antifreeze that is incredibly sweet. Yoichi realized he could apply this science to the transparent cabbage. If he could trigger that same reaction, he would have a new legendary ingredient. He carefully placed the vegetable into his specialized cooling unit. The goal was to slowly lower the temperature without hitting the freezing point. Precision was the key here. One wrong adjustment would turn the delicate cabbage into a useless block of ice. With the settings locked in, there was nothing left for him to do. He just had to step back and trust the process. Time was the only missing ingredient. He could only hope that his theories about labyrinth biology were correct. 3 days passed in a blur of anticipation. It was finally time to check the results of his cold storage gamble. To his relief, the cabbage had not turned into a solid block of ice. It had successfully produced a sugary antifreeze, meaning his high-stakes gamble had actually worked. He started by julienning the vegetable into thin, uniform strips. Every bit of excess water had to be drained to keep the texture perfectly crisp. The first bite left them both speechless as the new flavors hit their tongues. It possessed a legendary crunch and a natural sweetness that was absolutely addictive. For the next step, he massaged the remaining cabbage with a mix of salt and oil. He then seared some thin slices of meat to create the ultimate savory pairing. The final dish was a masterpiece of textures, featuring thinly sliced phantom meat served alongside a bowl of salted cabbage. The tavern's resident bard was completely speechless, finding the once tasteless vegetable now bursting with a natural sweetness. He had planned on leaving for the next town tomorrow, but this mysterious meal was the perfect parting gift. Hearing such high praise from a professional traveler made all of Yoishi's hard work feel worth it. Suddenly, a wave of inspiration struck the bard, and he immediately reached for his instrument. He called for the room's attention, silencing the rowdy adventurers as he stepped toward the center of the tavern. Tonight, he decided to dedicate his final performance to a new kind of legend. It was a song about a hero who used neither sword nor magic, but could turn cursed ingredients into a divine feast. The song was an absolute banger, and the crew was definitely vibing with the performance. For a moment, even Yoichi felt like he was finally living his main character dreams. But Sifi saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just a tavern show. The bard was going to take the legend of the Hall of Gastronomy and spread it across the entire continent. The more they hyped him up, the more the reality of his new fame started to sink in. Suddenly, being a culinary legend felt way more embarrassing than he ever imagined. End of story. Crew comment 6-7. Subscribe for more. Like or comment to help the channel reach more people. See you soon.